I am Theresa Malloy. I am 68 years old, and for most of my life I believed a mother could survive anything as long as she kept loving her children. That belief carried me through the years when I called them again and again, when I mailed birthday boxes they never opened, when I left gentle messages I knew they listened to but never answered. For 23 years I reached for them. For 23 years they turned their backs on me with a silence sharp enough to cut through bone. I was not forgotten by accident. I was pushed aside with intention. The day I understood that truth, I sat at my small kitchen table and opened the wooden box I had kept hidden in the back of my closet. Inside were 2 decades of postal receipts, tracking numbers, and faded holiday cards that never reached their hands. Each slip of paper felt like a small funeral for a hope I had buried. I ran my fingers across the dates. The ink had turned soft and gray, but the ache behind them had not. I realized I had been loving ghosts, not children. There is a kind of quiet that is not comforting. It circles you like cold air in a locked room. It reminds you that you are calling into a void. I lived in that quiet for years. I kept sending packages. I kept dialing their numbers. I kept trying to stay in a story they had already closed the book on. Until one morning I looked at my own reflection and saw a woman waiting for a door that would never open. A woman who had given everything and received an empty hallway in return. So I made a choice. A slow, steady, necessary choice. I changed my name. I sold my house. I erased the phone number they never used. I packed one suitcase, placed the wooden box inside it, and walked out of my old life without leaving a forwarding address. I became Tessa Quinn, not to hide from them, but to return to myself. For the first time in decades, I felt the air shift around me, as if I had stepped into a room where I was finally allowed to breathe. I told myself the story was over. I told myself they would never find me. I told myself the ending had already been written. But endings have a strange way of moving when you least expect them. 6 months after I disappeared, after I created a quiet new life in a coastal town where no one knew my history or my sorrow, someone slipped a letter under my door. The handwriting was sharp and familiar. The return address was a street I once drove down for dance recitals and dentist appointments. My heart began to beat in a rhythm I had not felt in years. I opened the envelope with hands that trembled in a way I could not control. Inside was a single line from my daughter, Lauren. She wrote that she knew where I was. She wrote that she needed to see me. She wrote that it was urgent. I stared at the paper for a long time, waiting for a feeling. Any feeling. What arrived instead was a cold question rising from the center of my chest. Why now? Why after 23 years of silence? What did they want? That required tracking down a mother they had chosen to erase? As I stood there holding the letter, a truth settled over me with the weight of a winter coat. My story with them was not finished. The past I thought I had buried was already walking toward me. I had left to protect the pieces of myself that still remained. Now those same children were knocking on the door of the life I had rebuilt. I wish I could tell you that my first instinct was hope. It was not. It was a caution. It was the unmistakable feeling that something had shifted in a way that would test the quiet strength I had spent months repairing. I folded the letter and placed it on the table beside the wooden box. I understood that whatever came next would not be simple. It would not be gentle. It would not be the reunion I once prayed for late at night. It would be the truth. And the truth, when it arrives after years of silence, does not knock politely. It enters the room and forces you to face what you have tried to unremember. Before we go deeper into this story, into the choices that shape the next chapter of my life, I want to invite you to stay with me. If stories of quiet justice, emotional healing, and second chances speak to you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. Your support helps us bring more voices like mine into the light. Now let me take you back to where everything truly began. In the months after I received Lauren's letter, my days settled into a quiet routine that felt both comforting and hollow. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom house on the outskirts of Springfield, a place where the morning air carried the smell of pine, and the evenings arrived with the steady hum of crickets. To anyone passing by, it might have looked peaceful. To me, it was a landscape shaped by absence. Every corner of that home reminded me of what I once carried and what I no longer had. The house was modest, painted a soft gray that blended into the neighborhood. Inside, the rooms were uncluttered, almost intentional in their simplicity. The only object that held true history was the faded blue scarf draped across the back of my armchair. I had knitted that scarf for Lauren when she was 12, choosing the yarn carefully, believing she would treasure something made by my hands. Years later, when I found it stuffed in a forgotten box during a move, the color washed out and the fabric stiff, I took it with me. Not because she wanted it, but because I needed it. It became the anchor I held when memories threatened to pull me under. I often sat with that scarf in my lap during early mornings when the sunlight stretched quietly across the floorboards. My fingers traced the worn threads as if I could read the history woven into each loop. It reminded me of a time when I believed I had a place in my children's future, when their laughter filled the kitchen, and I thought motherhood was a promise. That could not break. Now the scarf felt like a map of everything that had unraveled. Across the street lived my new neighbor, Eunice Carter. She was 74, warm-eyed, and always wearing something floral. Her house was larger than mine and painted a cheerful yellow. What distinguished it, though, was not its brightness, but the constant movement around it. Nearly every afternoon, her children or grandchildren would arrive. Some brought groceries, others trimmed her garden. On weekends, I heard their voices rising in gentle laughter as they helped her bake or sat with her on the porch swing. Watching them was like watching the life I had once imagined for myself but never received. I saw Eunice's daughter wrap a scarf around her mother's shoulders before the first cold wind of winter. I saw her grandchildren run into her arms as if she were the sun after a storm. None of this made Eunice boastful or distant. She often waved to me with kindness, unaware of how her joy pressed against the bruised parts of my heart. There were afternoons when she would walk over with a tin of cookies and ask if I needed anything. I always thanked her, always smiled, always said I was fine. Politeness can be a kind of armor. She did not know the truth. She did not know that I once stood at the center of my family, guiding every holiday and every tough season. Now I felt like a quiet shadow moving through rooms that no longer belonged to anyone. When her family visited, I sometimes closed my curtains, not out of resentment, but out of tenderness for myself. I could not bear the mirror they held up to me, yet something subtle began to shift as I observed her. Watching her receive love so openly forced me to confront my own emptiness. I was not jealous of her life. I was grieving mine. I was grieving who I used to be. The woman who mediated arguments, who cooked for 6, who kept spare blankets in the closet because someone was always spending the night. That woman no longer existed. Now I lived in a house that held only the sound of my own breathing. Still, Springfield had a way of softening the edges of my solitude. The quiet roads, the neighborly nods, the gentle rhythm of seasons beginning again reminded me that life did not end simply because a chapter closed. There were mornings when I felt a faint stirring inside me, a sense that something was waking up after years of being dormant. Not hope for my children, not reconciliation, something smaller and more personal, a question rising from deep within. What do I owe myself now? One evening, as the sky turned violet and the air cooled, I sat with the blue scarf across my knees. I looked out the window and saw Eunice laughing with her eldest grandson as he adjusted the porch light for her. Their silhouettes blended into the glow of the house, a tableau of everything warm and safe. Instead of hurting, a strange calm filled me. For the first time, I understood that my loneliness was not a punishment. It was a reflection of the truth I had lived for decades. There comes a moment when silence stops being an ache and becomes an answer. That night, I finally accepted mine. Memory does not return in full chapters. It arrives in fragments, sharp and unfinished, the way shards of glass still catch the light long after the window has been broken. In the quiet of my Springfield home, with Eunice's laughter drifting faintly from across the street, the past began to rise again, not because I wanted it, but because Lauren's letter had shaken something loose inside me. I had spent years avoiding these memories, yet they returned with a clarity that startled me. 5 moments, 5 fractures, 5 undeniable signs that my children had been closing the door long before I ever walked away. The first fragment was a birthday, Marcus's 20th. I had baked a cake that morning, a simple chocolate one, the kind he used to request when he was young. I placed a single candle in the center, not for him to blow out, but as a small ritual of my own. I dialed his number as the afternoon light shifted across my kitchen wall. The phone rang once, then clicked into a sharp tone that felt like a slap. The number had been blocked. I tried again, thinking perhaps I had pressed something wrong, but the same sound echoed back. Blocked. I remember staring at the frosting on the cake as it softened, thinking of all the years I held him through fevers and heartbreaks, only to be filtered out of his adult life like an unwanted call. The second fragment came dressed in spring sunlight, Lauren's college graduation. I arrived early and sat in the back row, careful not to intrude, hoping only to see her walk across the stage. I wore the pale blue dress she once said made me look gentle. I waited quietly until a security guard approached. He asked for the name of the graduate I was there for. When I gave Lauren's name, he checked his list and shook his head. I was not on the approved guest list. He said the family had provided specific names and I was not one of them. There was no anger in his voice, only procedure. I left the ceremony with my hands trembling, my daughter's scarf pressed against my side like a question I no longer knew how to answer. The third fragment carried the weight of winter. It arrived in a dented cardboard box on my doorstep, labeled Return to Sender. Inside was the Christmas gift I had mailed to Lauren's children, a book of bedtime stories, a knitted pair of mittens, and a card wishing them warmth. Nothing inside had been touched. The tape they had cut to open the box at the post office had left a jagged mark, as if the package had been wounded. I held the mittens against my palms, feeling the softness that was meant to warm small hands that I might never hold. That box sat on my dining table for weeks, like a reminder that giving does not guarantee receiving. The fourth fragment was a voice message, my last one. I had called on a quiet Sunday evening, hoping to bridge a distance I still believed could shrink if I tried hard enough. My voice shook as I spoke, not from fear, but from the weight of choosing words carefully, knowing each one might be ignored. I told them I missed them. I told them I was here if they ever needed anything. I told them I loved them in a tone soft enough to avoid sounding desperate. When I finished speaking, a long pause echoed in my ear before the message was sent. That message was never returned. Hearing my own voice play back days later felt like listening to a stranger reaching through static. The fifth fragment unfolded on a bus late at night. I remember the dim yellow lights flickering as the driver guided the vehicle through long stretches of highway. I sat alone, the blue scarf gathered in my arms, the fabric catching the warmth of my breath. It was the night I finally understood that my children no longer needed me, and perhaps had not needed me for years. Outside the window, the landscape blurred into shadows. Inside, the truth settled into me with painful clarity. I had held our family together during my husband's illness, working extra shifts, paying medical bills, negotiating debts, keeping the house from collapsing both literally and emotionally. My children never knew the sacrifices I made to keep them afloat. I never told them how close we came to losing everything. That silence, intended to protect them, became the distance that eventually separated us. These 5 memories were not accidents. They were choices made over time, choices that formed a pattern I could no longer deny. As I sat in my Springfield home, those fragments wove themselves into a single truth. My disappearance had not created the distance. It had only acknowledged it. The morning Lauren's letter arrived, I felt the shift before I noticed the envelope itself. It was as if the air in my small Springfield house paused, waiting for me to understand something my body sensed first. I had been folding laundry, the faded blue scarf draped across the back of my chair the way it always was, a quiet reminder of who I once tried to be. When I reached for the envelope on the floor, the handwriting pulled me still. It was hers. Sharp, deliberate, familiar in shape, but foreign in meaning. Seeing my new name written in her script sent a slow tightening through my chest. After 23 years of silence, they had found me. The letter was brief, polite in a way that felt cold on the page. She addressed me as Mom, though the word looked borrowed rather than remembered. She wrote that the family was hosting a gathering and they would be honored if I attended. The sentence looked warm at first glance, but warmth has a texture, and this lacked it. There were no acknowledgments of the years I sent cards and gifts, no mention of the calls unanswered or the voicemail I had recorded with shaking hands. Just an invitation, neatly written, as if the past were a smudge she preferred not to touch. I read the letter twice, then again, searching for sincerity hidden between the lines. There was none. Still, the paper trembled slightly in my hand, not from longing, but from a recognition that something had shifted. And whatever this was, it was not simple. 2 days later, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I answered anyway. "Hi, Mom," Lauren's voice said. Older now, steadier, emptier. She asked how I was, asked whether I liked Springfield, asked if I needed anything. Each question was shaped with the soft edges of concern, but the tone told another story. It held nothing warm, nothing personal. It was the voice of someone checking off items on a list. When Marcus took the phone, the pattern continued. His greetings were polite, his tone practiced. He asked about my health, whether I was financially stable, whether I felt settled in my new town. They were questions a child might ask a parent, but there was no childlike affection in his voice. Only distance. Only calculation. Only a faint tension under each word, as if he were circling a topic he was not yet ready to name. When the call ended, the silence in my house felt heavier than usual. Pain did not rise in me. Clarity did. People do not forget you for 23 years and suddenly remember you without reason. They remember when they need something, when you become useful again, when your absence no longer serves them. The truth settled in my mind with the weight of something I had always known, but never allowed myself to say out loud. That evening, needing air, I stepped outside. The sun was low, turning the neighborhood gold. Across the street, Eunice was pruning her roses, her slow, steady movements framed by the soft rustle of petals. When she saw me, she waved me over with that gentle certainty she carried so naturally. "You look thoughtful," she said. "I received a letter," I replied, "and a phone call. From my children." She set her pruning shears down and faced me fully. "After all this time?" I nodded. "They invited me to a family gathering. They said they want to reconnect." "And how do you feel about that?" she asked. I hesitated before answering. "I do not believe the invitation came from affection." Her expression softened, and she tapped her cane lightly against the ground. "If you stay away, the wondering will follow you. If you go, at least you will see the truth with your own eyes. There is a kind of protection in clarity." Her words were not sentimental. They were rooted in something deeper: experience, loss, the wisdom earned through surviving her own quiet battles. She was not telling me to trust them. She was telling me to trust myself. Walking back toward my house, her advice lingered inside me. I knew she was right. My instincts whispered the same message I had carried for years. People only remember you when you hold something they want. My children had chosen their distance long before I disappeared. Now suddenly, they wanted my presence. In the kitchen, I laid the letter beside the blue scarf. The scarf carried the memory of the mother I once was. The letter carried the intention of the mother they wanted now. I stood between them, the weight of the decision forming in the quiet. Should I walk into a room where my presence had once been denied? Or should I protect the fragile peace I had only just begun to build? I did not know yet what I would choose. I only knew that this time, whatever decision I made would not come from longing. It would come from the woman silence had shaped me into. I arrived at Lauren and Marcus's house on a mild Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when the air felt gentle and forgiving. Their neighborhood was quiet and manicured, lined with tall oaks and stone driveways. As I stepped out of the cab, I took in the sight of their home. It was large, elegant, and polished in a way that suggested success rather than warmth. I stood for a moment on the walkway, feeling both out of place and strangely invisible, as if the house itself did not recognize me. When the door opened, Lauren stood there with a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. She stepped aside without offering a hug. Marcus appeared behind her, nodding politely, his expression flat. They greeted me with formality, as if I were a distant acquaintance invited to a function out of obligation. Not one question about my health or how I had been managing on my own. Inside, their home was full of people. Friends, coworkers, neighbors. Conversations drifted through the rooms like light smoke. I recognized none of them, and none of them looked at me long enough to ask who I was. Instead, I became an object placed between the doorway and the living room, something seen but not acknowledged. Their children ran past me, laughing as they chased each other around the staircase. When one of them brushed my arm accidentally, he looked up, confused. His eyes did not hold recognition. He called out for Lauren, asking who the lady was. She answered without turning toward me. "She is someone your father and I know. Keep running." Her tone was casual, effortless, the way someone might identify a neighbor or a distant colleague. At that moment, I felt a small tear forming deep inside, not sharp enough to break me, but steady enough to sting. I tried to approach Marcus as he arranged food on the table, hoping for a small moment of connection. Before I could speak, he raised his hand slightly. "Mom, stand over there for a bit. I need to take care of something first." Stand over there, as if my presence disrupted the arrangement of the room, as if I were furniture out of place. I stepped back, letting the wave of humiliation pass quietly through me. I had learned long ago how to mask hurt with stillness. While they mingled, I walked slowly through the hallway, allowing my fingers to trail along the edges of framed photographs. There were beach trips, school recitals, birthday parties. None of them included me. My absence was not an accident. It was part of the design. Near the kitchen, a small waste bin sat beside the counter. The lid was slightly open, revealing bits of ribbon and crumpled wrapping paper. Something about the shade of the ribbon caught my eye. A deep winter blue. I felt my breath tighten as I reached down and lifted the paper. It was the wrapping from a Christmas gift I had mailed 10 years earlier, a children's storybook and a pair of mittens I had knitted myself. The package had been returned to me once before, unopened, and yet here was the wrapping, intact, the crease marks untouched, as if the gift itself had never been removed from the box. They had opened it only now, only because the contents no longer mattered. I held the paper for a long moment, feeling its smooth surface, searching for any sign that it had been touched lovingly. There was none. Into the trash it went, along with every attempt I had made to stay connected during those years. I let the lid fall gently, unwilling to draw attention to myself. As I moved into the living room, conversations swelled around me. People talked about vacations, new cars, business expansions. Lauren laughed easily with her guests, her voice bright and effortless. Not once did she introduce me. Not once did she guide anyone in my direction. I was a ghost standing among the living, present but irrelevant. When she finally approached me, she placed a hand lightly on my arm. "I hope you don't mind all the people here. It was last minute." Her touch lacked warmth and carried the faint energy of obligation. I looked into her eyes, seeking even the smallest trace of the daughter I once rocked to sleep. But her gaze skittered away, landing instead on someone calling her name. "I will be right back," she said. She walked away before I could answer. There was no open cruelty, no raised voices, just layers of quiet dismissal, each one settling over me like dust. I stood there with the knowledge that I had entered a home where my existence had no place. This gathering was not a reunion. It was an unveiling. The truth was becoming clear, not through their words, but through their actions, through the hollow spaces where affection should have been. And standing in that elegant room, surrounded by lives I had not been allowed to witness, I felt the early tremor of a realization I could no longer ignore. The gathering began to thin as the afternoon slipped into early evening. Guests drifted toward the door in clusters, taking with them the warm laughter and easy chatter that had filled the house. When the last visitor stepped outside, Lauren closed the door gently, then exchanged a brief look with Marcus. Something in that look tightened the room around me. It felt rehearsed, intentional, as if the true purpose of this invitation had been waiting behind a curtain, preparing to step forward. Marcus was the first to speak. "Mom, why don't we sit down for a moment?" His tone was polite, but the firmness beneath it carried the weight of expectation. Lauren gestured toward the dining table, cleared now except for a folder placed neatly in the center. A thin band of sunlight touched the edge of it, making the surface gleam. I approached slowly, feeling the stillness rise between us like a wall. They sat across from me. No softness in their posture, no closeness, just a steady, measured distance. Marcus tapped the folder. "We wanted to talk to you about something important, a family opportunity." The word family landed with a dull thud. It had not been used toward me in years, and hearing it now twisted something inside my chest. He opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. "It is an investment, a joint project for all of us. We are planning to build a vacation lodge outside the city, something the family can use for generations. We want you to be part of it." I glanced at the papers. Rows of numbers, projected returns, legal agreements. It felt less like an invitation and more like a transaction. Lauren folded her hands, her voice smooth and practiced. "We also did some research after Dad passed. We know you have money left from his insurance and savings, around $140,000. This project would be a meaningful way to contribute. It benefits all of us." Their eyes stayed fixed on me, watching, waiting. Not for my comfort, for my compliance. My fingers touched the edge of the scarf draped in my lap. The fabric was soft and frayed, a reminder of the version of motherhood I once believed in. I placed my other hand on the papers. Marcus's gaze sharpened as if he expected me to sign immediately. He leaned slightly forward. "Mom, this is a good opportunity, and it is time for you to support the family in a way that matters. We have been carrying a lot of responsibilities. This contribution would help all of us. Support the family." The irony of the phrase settled deep in my stomach. The years I spent paying medical bills, the loans I took out quietly, the nights I lay awake calculating how to keep our home from being swallowed by debt. They had forgotten those sacrifices, or maybe they had chosen not to remember. Lauren nudged the pen toward me. "Just sign here. It will not take long. Then we can move forward together. Together." The word brushed against me like cold air. I did not lift the pen. Instead, I studied their faces. Lauren's expression was stretched thin at the edges, her smile fixed but hollow. Marcus's jaw was tight, a sign of impatience slipping through his polished demeanor. Their eyes did not search mine for emotion or hesitation. They searched for agreement. I inhaled quietly and let the silence settle around us. Silence has always been my refuge. It allows truth to take shape without force. And in that moment, truth arrived with absolute clarity. They did not invite me here for reconciliation. They invited me because they needed access to something that belonged to me. Marcus broke the stillness. "Mom, are you listening? This is important. We do not have time for hesitation." I kept my gaze on the papers. "I hear you," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "I need to think about it." Lauren exchanged a sharp glance with him. "Think about it? There is nothing complicated here. We are offering you a chance to be part of something meaningful." Part of something. The phrasing felt rehearsed, polished, almost corporate in its tone. Marcus frowned. "Mom, why make this difficult? You are not using that money for anything. This project benefits everyone. It is not a big request." The tension in the room thickened. My hand trembled slightly on the scarf, not from fear, but from the gravity of understanding. I lifted my gaze to meet theirs. "I will think about it," I repeated. Marcus exhaled sharply, the sound edged with frustration. "We expected you to be more cooperative." Lauren's smile tightened. "We just want what is best for the family." Family. That word again. used as leverage rather than love. I placed the pen gently on the table. I said I will think about it. The firmness in my tone surprised even me. It created a small but unmistakable shift. Marcus leaned back, his expression darkening. Lauren's voice softened in a way that did not match her eyes. "All right," she said, "but do not take too long. We need your signature to move forward." I nodded, though inside me something had already closed. The power they expected to hold over me was slipping, replaced by a quiet resolve I had not felt in years. When I stood to leave, neither of them offered a hug. Neither asked if I needed help getting home. The silence that followed me to the door was dense with disappointment. Not because I had hurt them, but because I had not given them what they wanted. Outside, the evening air felt cool against my skin. I wrapped the blue scarf around my shoulders and let the breeze steady my breath. Power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it begins with a small refusal, a single moment when you choose not to bend. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I chose myself. The night after I left Lauren and Marcus's house, Springfield felt colder than usual. Not the kind of cold that settles on the skin, but the kind that drifts inward, filling the spaces between thoughts. I sat alone at my small kitchen table, the blue scarf folded neatly beside me, the soft lamplight turning its worn threads into muted silver. The house was quiet, holding the stillness of a moment waiting to be named. I had told them I needed time to think, yet the truth was already forming inside me, slow but undeniable. Their request had not wounded me. It has clarified me. There is a difference. Wounds fester, but clarity sharpens. And that night, clarity asked me to sit still long enough to understand myself again. I reached for a sheet of paper and laid it in front of me. The pen felt heavier than usual, as if aware of the weight of what it was about to write. Outside, the wind brushed lightly against the window, a soft tapping that felt almost like encouragement. I pressed the pen to the page and began to write my new name. Not the one they had grown indifferent to, but the one that would belong only to me, Tessa Quinn. The letters flowed slowly, as if each stroke separated me a little more from the life I had carried for decades. Tessa was not an erasure. She was a beginning, a return to the self I had muted under years of responsibility and silence. I signed her name again, this time without trembling. I gathered documents that had defined me for most of my life: identification cards, bank statements, utility bills, phone contracts. Each one carried the echo of a person shaped by motherhood, marriage, and obligation. I laid them in a single stack, smoothing the edges with my palm. The scarf rested beneath my hand, soft and familiar, grounding me as I prepared to detach from everything that had kept me anchored to pain. The house seemed to breathe as I moved through it. Floorboards creaked gently, as though offering farewell. I paused at the doorway of each room: the living room where I had spent quiet evenings knitting, the bedroom where the moonlight often crossed the floor in soft silver lines, the small kitchen where I warmed my hands on coffee mugs during winter mornings. None of these spaces held memories of my children anymore, only echoes of the woman who had tried so long to stay present in their lives. By midnight, the decisions had taken shape. I would sell the house. I would close my bank accounts. I would cancel the phone number they never called. I would walk away without leaving a trail for them to follow. Not out of cruelty, not even out of protection, but because the version of me who had waited was no longer alive in these rooms. The next morning, I contacted a local realtor. His voice was warm and efficient. He asked for measurements, photographs, timelines. I answered calmly. The house sold faster than I expected. Perhaps life responds quickly when you finally choose yourself. At the bank, the fluorescent lights hummed softly as I filled out the closure forms. The teller asked whether I was sure about transferring everything to a new institution. I nodded. She stamped the papers lightly, unaware that each stamp marked the closing of a chapter that had stretched across decades. At the phone store, I handed over the number I had kept since my children were teenagers. The representative smiled and told me the cancellation was complete. He did not know the weight of the exchange. He did not need to. Some endings do not require an audience. Within 2 weeks, my belongings were reduced to a suitcase, a small wooden box of receipts and letters, and the blue scarf. I boarded a bus heading south, watching Springfield fade behind me like a painting brushed over with white. The road opened ahead, wide and unburdened. The coastal town I chose was small and quiet, marked by gentle tides and the scent of salt carried on the wind. Waves rolled steadily against the shore, a rhythm that felt like breathing. I found a modest rental near the water, a place where mornings arrived with pale sunlight and evenings hummed with the distant cry of gulls. I unpacked slowly, placing the scarf on the back of a new chair, letting it claim its place in a life with fewer expectations. The ocean air slipped through the open window, cool and clean, washing away the remnants of the home I had left behind. For the first time in years, I felt no weight on my shoulders, no obligation to call, no fear of silence, only a spaciousness inside me that I had never known. As I stood on the small balcony overlooking the sea, I spoke words that had lived unspoken in my heart for too long. I am not seeking revenge. I am simply walking away. 6 months passed gently in the coastal town, each day settling into the next like soft waves folding over the shoreline. Life there moved at a slower rhythm. Mornings began with the low hum of fishing boats drifting into the harbor. Afternoons carried the scent of salt and warm sand. Evenings were marked by a sky brushed with streaks of lavender and gold. It was the kind of place where time loosened its grip, allowing breath to return to the body in a way I had forgotten was possible. I spent my days walking along the water, letting the tide pull old memories loose and carry them back into the sea. My small rental home became a sanctuary. The blue scarf rested on the back of my kitchen chair, no longer an anchor of sorrow, but a gentle reminder of the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming. It was during one of those quiet walks that I first met Sam Whitmore. He was sitting on a bench facing the ocean, a paperback book in his hands and a thermos of coffee resting beside him. His face held the kind of softness that comes from surviving grief without letting it turn into bitterness. When I passed by, he looked up and nodded, a gesture so simple and sincere that it felt like an invitation to stop. He introduced himself, his voice steady and warm. 71 years old, retired carpenter, born and raised 2 towns over. He told me he lost his wife 3 years earlier. His children lived far away and rarely visited. After a short pause, he said, "I do not have anyone now." His words were spoken without self-pity. They were simply the truth. I sat beside him, feeling the ocean breeze sweep across us. Listening to him, I realized that loneliness is not a single story. There are people who lose their loved ones to time and illness, and there are people like me who lose them to distance and choice. Some become widows, others become orphans of the living. Both kinds of absence leave quiet, hollows inside the chest. In the weeks that followed, Sam and I began to cross paths more often, at the small cafe near the pier, at the morning market where fishermen sold their catch, on the narrow walking trail that wound along the cliffs. Our conversations grew naturally, threaded with pauses that felt comfortable rather than empty. He admired the way I made tea, saying it felt like a ritual that carried peace into the room. He said there was something steady about me, something soft but unbroken. One afternoon, while we sat on the porch of the cafe watching the waves roll in, he said, "Someone like you should never be forgotten." The words landed gently but firmly, like a hand placed on the shoulder of a weary traveler. I felt a warmth move through me, quiet and unfamiliar. For years, I had tried to earn recognition from the people who should have loved me without condition. Yet here was a man who saw value in my presence without needing anything from me. Our friendship grew in the spaces where silence felt safe. He would tell me stories about his wife, how she loved to paint the ocean at sunset. I would tell him about the coastal towns I used to visit when my children were small. He noticed things others had overlooked for years, the way I folded my hands when thinking, the way I paused before answering a question, the way my eyes softened when watching the tide come in. He never asked about my past directly. Instead, he created a space where I could offer pieces of it at my own pace. When I told him my children no longer spoke to me, he did not respond with shock or pity. He simply nodded and said, "Some people do not know how to hold what they once had." There was nothing romantic in our connection. It was rooted in companionship, in the understanding that two people could sit beside each other without needing to fill the air with words. With him, quiet did not feel like abandonment. It felt like a presence. One evening, after sharing a pot of tea on my porch, Sam rose to leave. He paused at the doorway, looking at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "starting over takes more courage than most people will ever admit, and you did it with dignity." I held his gaze, feeling the truth in his words settle into the empty places inside me. For the first time in decades, I was forming a life not defined by what I had lost, but by what I was choosing. The ocean murmured outside, steady and constant. I felt it echo within me. Life in the coastal town had settled into a rhythm so gentle that I almost believed the past had loosened its grip. Morning walks with the sound of gulls circling overhead. Afternoon tea shared with Sam on the porch while sunlight danced across the railing. Evenings spent listening to the tide rise and fold into itself. For the first time in years, I felt stitched together rather than pulled apart. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted again. I was watering the small herb garden outside my porch when a dark sedan pulled up beside the curb. The engine idled for a moment before a man stepped out, dressed in a navy suit that looked too formal for this quiet town. He held a black leather briefcase and moved with the confident stiffness of someone accustomed to our authority. When he approached the porch, he removed his sunglasses and offered a clipped smile. "Mrs. Malloy," he said. The name struck me like a small stone. No one in this town knew me by that name. I kept my voice steady. "My name is Quinn." He nodded, though his eyes said otherwise. "My name is Daniel Foster. I am an attorney representing your daughter, Lauren." My pulse settled into a slow, deliberate rhythm. I gestured for him to step onto the porch, though I did not invite him inside. The ocean breeze moved between us, soft but persistent, as if reminding me of the life I had tried to build here. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of documents secured with a metal clip. "I was asked to locate you regarding an important financial matter connected to your late husband's estate." I kept my gaze on him, silent. "There is a remaining inheritance account," he continued, "valued at approximately $90,000. It requires your signature for release and proper distribution. Your cooperation would make the process much smoother." $90,000. The number was spoken with the casual confidence of someone expecting gratitude. But my husband and I had settled every account before he passed. I had handled the medical bills, the debts, the insurance claims. There were no hidden funds, nothing unclaimed, nothing left unspoken. "What account?" I asked. He lifted the document as if presenting evidence. "Your husband set it aside years ago. Your children are hoping to resolve it quickly." Resolve, a word used often by lawyers, but in this context it felt like a thin curtain draped over something else. I studied his face carefully. He did not look uncomfortable. He did not look uncertain. He was reciting prepared lines, polished and rehearsed. "There is no such account," I said quietly. He hesitated for the first time. Not long, just enough for truth to flicker across his eyes. "The information was provided by your daughter. She assured us you would recognize it." My chest tightened in a slow, controlled way. I did not want to feel hurt. I only wanted to understand the shape of what was happening. "If the account existed," I said, "I would have known. I managed everything." He shifted his weight, adjusting the briefcase. "Perhaps your memory is not clear. It has been many years." A coldness traveled through me, not from fear, but from clarity. This was not about inheritance. This was a lure, a fabricated sum dangled like bait, meant to draw me back into their reach. They had not forgotten me. They had tracked me, not out of longing or remorse, but for possibility. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, correcting himself reluctantly, "your cooperation is important. Your daughter has made considerable efforts to locate you." I exhaled slowly, letting his words settle, letting their meaning unfold. For months, I believed I had successfully stepped out of the story that once held me captive. Yet here it was again, reaching across states and silence to find me. "Tell Lauren," I said, "that anything requiring deception does not require me." He blinked, momentarily unsettled by the firmness of my tone. "I will inform her," he replied. He gathered the documents, closed the briefcase, and walked back to his car. When the engine started, it sounded far louder than it should in a town built on stillness. As the sedan drove away, I stood on the porch, my hands resting gently on the railing. The ocean stretched in front of me, steady and unbothered. The sky shifted toward late afternoon shades of rose and gold. I felt something inside me settle into place, not with heaviness, but with precision. For years, I believed I had been forgotten. Then, I believed I had been abandoned. Now, a sharper truth revealed itself. I had not only been unwanted, I had been hunted, not for who I was, but for what I might give, for the resources they imagined I still held, for the possibilities they had assigned to my name. It was a revelation that did not break me. It crystallized me. I whispered into the wind rising from the sea, letting the words anchor themselves in my chest. I was never forgotten. I was pursued. And as I stood there, the tide pulling forward around my ankles, I understood the next chapter of this story would require a strength I had not yet shown. 2 weeks after the attorney visited my porch, an official envelope appeared in my mailbox. The seal on the corner told me before I opened it that the past had once again found a new way to reach me. Inside was a summons carrying my daughter's name. Lauren had filed a civil action claiming that I had abandoned my responsibilities as a parent and caused emotional and financial hardship to the family. The accusation was so ironically inverted that I stood still for several minutes, letting the weight of it move through me. I had spent decades reaching for them. Now they accuse me of walking away, not because they believed it, but because it served a purpose. The local courthouse sat on a hill overlooking the ocean. On the morning of the hearing, the sky was wrapped in a quiet gray, the kind that softens the edges of buildings and people. I wore a simple dress, the blue scarf draped over my shoulders, its worn thread steadying my breath. As I walked up the steps, a calm settled into me. Fear did not follow me into that building. Only the truth did. Inside, the courtroom was modest, wooden benches, pale walls, a judge whose face held the expression of someone who had seen far too many families unravel under fluorescent lights. Lauren and Marcus sat. On the opposite side, dressed formally, their posture straight, their eyes avoiding mine. Their attorney whispered something to them, and I watched Lauren nod with a confidence she had not earned. Beside me sat Sam's friend, Michael Avery, a retired attorney who still took occasional pro bono cases. Sam had introduced us, insisting that I should not stand alone in a battle built on manipulation. Michael had the gentle steadiness of someone who understood that justice often lives in small, quiet moments, rather than grand declarations. When the judge called the case to order, Lauren's attorney rose first. He painted a portrait of a mother who had abandoned her family, severed contact without cause, and left her children burdened with emotional strain. His language was smooth, strategic, and hollow. Not once did he mention the 23 years preceding my departure. Not once did he acknowledge the history they had rewritten. When he finished, the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Quinn, you may respond." I stood slowly, feeling the blue scarf warm beneath my fingertips. Without a word, I reached into my bag and withdrew the small wooden box I had carried for decades. Its hinges creaked softly as I opened it. Inside were the artifacts of a life lived in one direction only. Cards returned unopened, receipts stamped with dates stretching across 2 decades, phone records, messages, every attempt I had made to remain their mother in the years they chose to forget me. I placed the box on the table with deliberate care, then I removed a small stack of envelopes, some yellowed with age. "These," I said, "are the cards I sent every year until the post office returned them." I laid them out. Next, the receipts. "These show the packages I mailed, birthdays, holidays. moments I tried to celebrate even when I was no longer welcome. I added them to the table. Then the phone logs. I called, I left messages, I waited. My voice stayed soft, not because it lacked strength, but because the truth did not require force. It only required space. Finally, I placed one last item before the judge, a printed transcript of my final voicemail. I reached out until reaching out became another way of being hurt. The courtroom held stillness the way a shoreline holds water before the tide shifts. Then I spoke the line that had lived inside me for years, a truth that defined every step that had brought me here. I called, I sent it, I waited. Only silence ever came back to me. The words landed gently, but the truth behind them carried weight. Michael rose then, his presence calm and assured. He did not raise his voice or dismantle arguments aggressively. Instead, he highlighted the evidence I had laid before the court, the consistency of my outreach, the long history of returned correspondence, and the absence of any attempt from Lauren or Marcus to contact me in those years. He spoke not as a lawyer defending a client, but as a witness to the dignity I had carried through years of neglect. When he finished, the judge leaned back slightly, looking from the box of evidence to Lauren and Marcus. His expression held neither anger nor sympathy, only clarity. The silence that followed was not empty. It was revealing. It filled the room with the truth that had been missing from their polished accusations. For the first time since stepping into that courtroom, Lauren's composure faltered. Marcus looked down at the floor, unable to meet the judge's eyes. The hearing was not yet over, but the shift had already begun. Not in their hearts, but in the narrative they had tried to build. And as I sat down, the blue scarf settling softly against my shoulders, I felt something open inside me. Not triumph, not vindication, just the quiet power of being seen. The hearing resumed after a brief recess, the air inside the courtroom carrying a tension that felt quieter now, but heavier. The judge returned to the bench with a folder in his hands, his expression steady, unreadable. I sat with the blue scarf draped softly across my lap, its familiar weight anchoring me. Across the aisle, Lauren and Marcus straightened their backs as if preparing for a favorable outcome. Their attorney whispered something to them that made Marcus nod with a confidence that did not match the truth laid bare minutes earlier. When the judge spoke, his voice was measured, the kind that carried authority without force. "I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties," he began, "and what stands out is a consistent pattern. Mrs. Quinn," he paused, looking at my children, "formerly Mrs. Malloy, made repeated attempts over the course of 2 decades to maintain contact with her children. These attempts were not reciprocated." Lauren shifted, her face tightening. Marcus's jaw flexed. The judge continued. "The plaintiffs claim that their mother abandoned familial responsibilities is not supported by the documentation. In fact, the evidence points to the opposite." Silence rippled through the room. "Therefore," he said, closing the folder, "the court dismisses the claim in its entirety." The words landed not with triumph, but with truth finally acknowledged in a place where truth could not be twisted. The judge leaned forward slightly, his gaze moving between Lauren and Marcus. "And let me be clear, adult children who choose to sever contact for extended periods cannot later claim neglect simply because it serves their interests. Family is not a contract of convenience." Marcus inhaled sharply, his composure cracking. Lauren bowed her head slightly, though whether in shame or calculation, I could not tell. The judge concluded, "Mrs. Quinn owes no legal duty beyond the compassion she already extended for 23 years. This court sees no fault in her actions." With that, the gavel struck, a single sound, final, precise. The courtroom began to stir, but the space around us felt suspended. I sat still, the truth settling into me like a quiet exhale. I had not fought for victory. I had fought for recognition. And I had received it not in applause or swelling emotion, but in a simple statement. I had done enough. I stood to leave, gathering the wooden box in my hands. As I turned toward the aisle, Marcus stepped forward. His expression was no longer polished. Anger flickered behind his eyes, sharp and restless. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "When you get old and helpless," he said, "do not expect us to come back for you." The sentence was meant to wound. It was meant to press into old scars and awaken the ache that had lived in me for years. But instead, something unexpected happened. I smiled, not out of cruelty, not out of defiance, but out of understanding. I met his eyes, steady and unwavering. "You left long before I did," I said. "I am only walking the path you showed me." His face faltered, the certainty in his expression dissolving for the briefest moment. Lauren watched from a few steps behind him, her posture rigid, her gaze avoiding mine entirely. I did not speak again. I did not need to. The shift inside me had already taken place. The balance of power that once tilted so heavily toward longing had finally found its center. I no longer carried the weight of wanting anything from them. As I walked toward the exit, Sam's friend Michael gave me a small nod. He understood without words. Outside the courthouse, the sea breeze met me first, cool and steady, carrying the scent of the distant tide. The sky stretched open, wide and quiet, as if making room for the life waiting beyond this moment. I stepped onto the pavement with a sense of clarity deeper than anything I had known in years. There was no victory lap, no triumphal swell, only the soft unfolding of truth. I did not lose my children today. I had lost them long ago. What I gained was the freedom to stop reaching for hands that never reached back. Standing at the top of the courthouse steps, I wrapped the blue scarf around my shoulders, letting it catch the wind. The years of silence, the unanswered calls, the unopened gifts, all of it had brought me to this final understanding. I did not need them to return. I did not need them to choose me. I only needed to choose myself. And for the first time in decades, I finally had. In the weeks following the court's decision, my life settled into a quiet rhythm again. The coastal wind moved through the shutters each morning. The smell of tea drifted through my kitchen. The blue scarf rested on the back of my chair, carrying no weight except the memory of the woman I once tried so hard to be. Peace did not arrive suddenly. It came in small, steady breaths, reminding me that solitude could be gentle rather than sharp. Then, one late afternoon, a plain envelope appeared at my door. The handwriting on the front was careful, almost hesitant. Lauren's name was written neatly in the corner. I held the envelope for several seconds before opening it. It felt light, as if the words inside did not yet know the burden they carried. I sat at my table, the soft sound of the ocean rolling in the distance, and unfolded the letter. "Mom," it began, "I have been in therapy for the past month. I am learning things about myself that I should have understood years ago, things I should have faced instead of ignoring." The lines moved slowly across the page, her handwriting small but deliberate. I thought distance would protect me from the pain of our past. Instead, it created more of it. I blamed you for things that were never your fault. I let resentment guide me, and I taught Marcus to do the same. I see that now. I paused, letting the words sink in. There was no anger rising in me, only a soft ache, the kind that feels familiar but no longer overwhelming. The letter continued. During one of my sessions, I was asked to name something I regretted deeply. At first, I could not answer. Then I remembered the blue scarf you knitted for me when I was 12. I found it in one of the old storage boxes. It still smelled like lavender. It still had your initials stitched inside the corner. My fingers brushed the scarf resting on my lap. I realized how many things you gave that I never saw, how many times you reached out that I never acknowledged. I understand everything too late. There was sincerity in her words, shaped not by manipulation this time, but by reflection, and yet something inside me remained still, not moving toward her, not moving away. "I'm sorry," she wrote. Not because the court made things clear, but because I finally allowed myself to look at the truth. I do not expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I am trying to change. I hope one day you can forgive me." The letter ended with her name, written more softly than the rest. For a long while, I did not move. The wind rustled the curtains gently, casting shifting shadows across the floor. I read the letter again, slowly, allowing each word to find its place inside me. There was no surge of emotion, no sudden release, just a deep, quiet understanding of how much time had shaped us into people neither of us recognized. I set the letter on the table and folded it with careful precision, smoothing the creases with my fingertips. My hands moved slowly, the moment stretching as if time itself wanted to soften its edges. I opened the drawer where the wooden box sat. Its hinge clicked softly when I lifted the lid. Inside were the tokens of 23 years of silence, cards returned unopened, receipts from packages the post office sent back, records of calls never answered, and now a letter written too late for repair, but not too late for truth. I placed Lauren's letter on top of the stack and closed the lid gently. The lock clicked into place, not with finality, but with acceptance. I did not hate her. Hatred had burned out years ago, leaving only ash that no longer held shape. I did not forgive her either, not because I refused to, but because forgiveness required a bridge I no longer needed to cross. And I did not reply, not out of punishment, but out of understanding. Some stories do not circle back. Some distances are not meant to be closed. Some truths are acknowledged not for reconciliation, but for release. I sat at the table for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves outside. There was peace in the quiet. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of letting go. Lauren had offered an apology, a sincere one. But apologies do not bind people together. They simply illuminate the path each person must walk. I ran my fingers lightly over the wooden box one last time before standing. The scarf brushed against my arm as I moved, soft and familiar, reminding me that healing is not always loud. Sometimes it is a single breath, a small decision, a gentle closing of a chapter that once held you tightly. At that moment, I understood the truth I had been moving toward for years. I did not need to answer her. I only needed to release her. The months that followed unfolded like a long, gentle exhale. The tension that had wrapped itself around my ribs for decades loosened thread by thread until breathing no longer felt like work. The sea became my daily companion. Each morning, I stepped onto my small porch with a cup of warm tea, letting the rising sun paint its soft gold across the surface of the water. The tide moved in slow arcs, consistent and unhurried, reminding me that not everything in life must be held or chased. Some things, like healing, simply arrive when space is made for them. Sam often joined me. He would walk over from his cottage across the narrow path, carrying his own mug and wearing the comfortable quiet of someone who understood how to share silence. We sat side by side, watching fishing boats return in the early light. He told me stories about his wife, about the garden she used to keep, about the sound of her laughter that once filled their home like music. I listened, not out of obligation, but out of the recognition that two people shaped by loss could sit together and create something steady, even if it remained unspoken. One morning, he looked at me with a soft curiosity. "You seem lighter," he said, as if something finally let go. I nodded. Maybe I am learning that release is not the same as forgetting. It is simply stopping the fight inside me. He smiled. "Someone like you deserves peace." His words did not carve open old wounds. Instead, they settled into the spaces that had already begun to mend. Peace no longer felt like something fragile. It felt earned. Inside my home, I kept my knitting basket by the window where the light was strongest. The blue scarf, the old one, the one that carried the memories I had stopped trying to fix, rested neatly folded on the table beside it. I no longer touched it seeking comfort or sorrow. It had become a symbol, not of what I had lost, but of what I had survived. And so I began to knit again, not out of longing this time, or hope that someone might cherish what I made. I knitted because it steadied my breath, because each loop pulled me closer to myself. I chose a new color, a soft pale blue, lighter than the original scarf, a color that resembled dawn rather than dusk. The yarn slipped through my fingers gently, forming rows that grew with each passing morning. I was not creating a gift. I was creating a beginning. As the new scarf grew longer, the old one waited quietly. One afternoon, with the sun warming my shoulders, I opened the drawer where the wooden box sat. Its lock glimmered faintly. I lifted the lid and felt the familiar weight of the past rise softly around me, no longer sharp. I placed the old scarf inside, folding it carefully, letting its worn fibers settle into the box among the letters, receipts, and years of unanswered efforts, not as a gesture of bitterness, but as a gesture of closure. When I lowered the lid and pressed the lock into place, the click sounded gentle, almost grateful. The scarf was not a wound anymore. It was a chapter, and chapters are meant to be closed. Life in the coastal town continued its quiet rhythm. I met new neighbors, learned the names of the fishermen who sold fresh catch near the pier, discovered the bakery that made the softest cinnamon bread. None of them knew my past. None of them asked for anything from me. None of them carried expectations shaped by old grief. I was simply Tessa, a woman who lived near the water, a woman who brewed good tea, a woman who walked with steady steps and did not rush. There was no dramatic transformation, no sudden burst of joy, just small, accumulating moments that formed a life I could finally inhabit without apology. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, blending pink into the calm blue of dusk, I sat with Sam on the porch. The air was warm, the waves are gentle. I draped the new scarf across my lap, its pale blue threads reflecting the last light of day. He looked at it with quiet admiration. "A new one," he said. "Yes," I answered, "a new one." "Do you feel different?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "I feel whole," I said, and I think I had forgotten what that felt like. We sat without speaking after that, the silence resting easily between us. It was in that stillness that the truth rose inside me with a clarity I had never allowed before. Sometimes the way to love yourself is simply to stop trying so hard to be loved by the wrong people. I whispered it to the evening air, letting it settle. Sometimes the way to love yourself is to stop trying at all. My past did not vanish. My children did not return. There was no reconciliation, no grand reunion. But there was something better. There was peace, not revenge. Not resentment, not the desperate reaching of earlier years, just a quiet acceptance that my story did not end in bitterness. It ended in beginning again, a soft beginning, a true one. And as the night drew its cool veil across the town, I looked out at the horizon and finally understood that healing does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives in a cup of morning tea, a knitted row of yarn, a steady friend beside you, or a breath you no longer struggle to take. Before I close this chapter, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you forgive me, or would you choose, as I did, to walk away and begin again?